by the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is a description of the transition from one state to another state of consciousness. When I take that tablet of LSD for the first time, I can recite or I can listen to a tape of somebody reciting the script, and that will guide me through my trip. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah? So why is that important? Well, the song he wrote as a result of that, turn off your mind, relax and float downstream, the opening words of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And Tomorrow Never Knows was the song which kicked off the psychedelic revolution. And he brought the Tibetan Book of the Dead here. So I hope that sort of adds a little bit of context. The other thing, just to show how countercultural this place was, we're all familiar with Frank Zappa and the Mothers, yeah? Well, when the Mothers did a British tour, this was their headquarters, okay? And if you remember, We're Only In It For The Money, the album cover, a parody of Sgt. Pepper's. It was here that Frank and Paul entered an informal agreement that the Mothers could use that cover, or they could create a parody. And I think there was a lot of legal stuff later, but eventually it was all settled. But the agreement was just here. So I've talked about the countercultural bookstore. Let's move on to the art gallery, because the art gallery again was cutting edge, and they were interested in sort of exhibitions of the really out there stuff. And one of the first exhibits was by a New York artist, a member of the Fluxus group. But most importantly, the artist brought sponsorship. Yeah, so John Dunbar was really interested if he was going to be paid to put on this exhibition. And so, yes, you probably know who I'm talking about. We're talking about sort of Yoko Ono, yes? And so what we have to imagine is that John Lennon has been on a 3-day trip. And he parks his car on the road. He walks through the alleyway we walked through. He really wants to talk to John Dunbar or whatever, yes? So he speaks to John Dunbar, then he notices this exhibition, which hasn't yet opened. So he goes in, interested, and the first thing he sees is a white step ladder hanging from the ceiling, you know, a tiny thing. So he climbs up the ladder, looks at the thing, and yes, comes down. Yoko standing there, black, white card, passes it, flicks it over, says, so that's the first encounter between John and Yoko. There's also a little bit of banter, if you like, an exchange, because remember, the exhibition hasn't opened. And one of the exhibits is a white board with nails. And John wants to hammer a nail into the canvas, but Yoko doesn't want him to do that because the exhibition hasn't opened yet. So John says, well, how much would it cost to hammer an imaginary nail? And Yoko says, you know what, 50 pence. And John says, so he hammers an imaginary nail. So that's the connection. And Yoko's on record as saying she thinks she's found somebody who's on the same wavelength. And from that point, so she pesters John with messages and postcards, even though he's in India on retreat.
I find it interesting you use the word pesters.
Yeah, well, I mean, John was married,
yeah.
And I think he used, or I think he may have used a similar term, because he thought she was, I think, because being contacted every day by somebody you didn't meet. And remember, he's this sort of iconic figure, used to people approaching, but perhaps not with the intensity of that. I mean, all this stuff is just my own views, and you know, I'm talking back, you know. So I'm just sort of sharing my thought. Yeah. So
did they actually start getting together in New York? Because for some reason I was thinking.
You know, the original contact between Yoko and the Beatles, she approached Paul, okay? Because when she was in New York, she was involved with musicians like John Cale, and she contacted Paul initially she was doing some kind of charity presentation to John Cale, and she wanted some original manuscripts, and she asked Paul, yeah? But Paul sort of wasn't all that interested, and he pushed her towards John. But I don't know what John did there, yes? But the interesting thing is, at the moment, Yoko has a retrospective at the Tate Modern, which is a huge art gallery, and all the stuff that John saw is in that exhibition. And it also maps out her artistic career from the very first moments, right the way through Fluxus, links with John, and so on, up to her most recent works, which are in the last 10 years. And yeah, it's a really great 2 hours. I went there with sort of mixed feelings, because most of the people I've talked to about John, you know, they don't refer to John and Yoko. They don't refer to as Yoko. It's that Japanese woman, you know. So it's all negativity, and most of the vibes I've got about Yoko are negative, yeah. But the exhibition does show that she was an artist with a vision, and she was well ahead of, you know, what was, say, avant-garde then is pretty mainstream now. Yeah? I'm trying to be as fair as I possibly can. Yeah?
It's